lawyer's perspective on S4HANA implementations and managing security and performance within S4HANA. Those are just two of the topics we're going to cover here on Season 1, Episode 7 of Journey to S4HANA.
Welcome to Journey to S4HANA, the podcast that covers everything related to SAP implementations. This podcast is not affiliated with SAP and covers the realistic truth behind S4HANA, Ariba, and SuccessFactors ERP implementation success. Whether you're new to the world of SAP, an existing ECC, or R3 customer, a multinational team, or a mid-sized organization, this podcast is for you. Now, here's your host, Eric Kimberling.
Hi there, my name is Eric Kimberling. I am the host here today of Journey to S4HANA. Thank you for being here. This is the podcast that covers everything related to S4HANA implementations, everything you need to know, the good, the bad, the ugly, from an independent and tech-agnostic perspective. The show is sponsored by Third Stage Consulting, which is the company I work for. We're an independent and tech-agnostic consulting firm that helps clients through their S4HANA implementations as well as other system implementations as well. You can find new episodes of this show every week at journeytosforhana.com. You can also find all the past episodes of the show at that same website, journeytosforhana.com. The show is produced by Major Tom Productions. If you'd like to feature your brand or sponsor any of these episodes of this podcast or even some of our sister podcasts related to digital transformation, you can contact Major Tom Productions using the contact information we've included below. With me this week is our co-host, Darian Fiakutsky. Darian, thanks for being here today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. I'm excited for today's show. We've got a really good couple topics we're going to cover. We're going to get into some audience questions from social media. We're going to talk about managing security and performance in S4HANA. We're going to do that in the opening segment. And then later in the show, we're going to bring on our guest, Marcus Harris from Taft Law. He's a partner there at Taft Law, and he's going to talk with us about a lawyer's perspective on S4HANA and S4HANA implementations. So excited for the show here today. But before we bring Marcus on the show, Darian, what kind of question have you found that might be worth discussing here in today's episode?
Yeah, so this is an interesting take on one of the SAP videos posted on Eric's channel on YouTube. And so this is from Clarence Wrong. And he says, this is still old and not reflecting the current Fusion versus SAP S4HANA. Fusion is open and a scalable platform that allows enterprises to grow without technical limit. Fusion provides software update every 90 days, eliminating technical hindrance for innovation and patching vulnerability. Oracle only charges one subscription fee for according to your scope of implementation. No charge for resizing after implementation. So Eric, what are your takes on this? Do you agree with this? Do you disagree with that? What is your take?
Yeah, so I don't necessarily disagree, but I think if I had to venture to say, I would speculate and suspect that this person either works for Oracle or works for an Oracle reseller, because it was very pro-Oracle and talking about all the strengths of Oracle. But they certainly do highlight some of the strengths of Oracle, and why this question is so relevant is because my view of ERP implementations in general, even if you're implementing S4HANA, is to know how that product compares to other systems in the marketplace and to know what some of the limitations are, what some of the strengths and weaknesses are, because that's going to help you be better at planning the implementation. It's going to help you make better decisions, manage risk better, all that stuff. So this person's talking about a lot of things that I don't necessarily disagree with, but I also wouldn't say that Oracle is better than SAP or S4HANA in some of those categories. I do think Oracle is a bit more flexible than S4HANA. I'll give them that. I think it's a bit more open in terms of the architecture, the programming language and whatnot. It's a bit more open than S4HANA. But as far as scalability and technical fitting and subscription models, I honestly don't think there's a distinct advantage to Oracle over SAP in that case. Now, having said that, I mentioned how Oracle Fusion is usually, in general, more open and more flexible than S4HANA, but that comes at a price. A lot of companies that implement S4HANA want to do that because they don't necessarily want or need that flexibility. They're trying to drive standardization and a common business process operating model. So for a lot of organizations, that's a strength of S4HANA, is that it creates a certain amount of, call it standardization or common business processes that may be too tempting to change if you're implementing a product like Oracle. So don't necessarily disagree, but I think it was it's kind of a biased comment that suggests that somehow Oracle's better than SAP, and I don't necessarily think that either.
Yeah, definitely an interesting comment, but I'm happy that you could share your take on it and give what you thought on it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so I'm excited to get into today's article topic. It is all about the security, performance, and stability of SAP S/4HANA environments. So, patching is a key part of maintaining this security, performance, and stability of S/4HANA environments, and it includes applying specific corrections or updates such as security notes, support packages, or kernel patches tailored to unique needs of SAP S/4HANA deployments. Eric, how do you think the landscape of cybersecurity threats has evolved, especially concerning SAP environments, and what are driving these changes?
Yeah, well, I think it's smart of SAP to really focus on this because SAP, I would argue, of all of the big ERP and enterprise technology vendors, I would argue that SAP might have the biggest vulnerability. Maybe Microsoft's a close second, or maybe you could argue that Microsoft is slightly ahead in terms of the importance of cybersecurity, only in that SAP has such big, Fortune 500 multinational global organizations using the software, and those organizations often are bigger targets for cybersecurity threats, especially the nefarious hacking and things of that nature. Um, I also think that SAP has done a pretty good job historically, not even just with S4 HANA, but even going back to ECC and R3. I think SAP has done a good job of locking down internal security too, so where you can set up pretty rigid security profiles to where your own employees don't have access to information they shouldn't have access to, and vice versa. People that do need access or should have it, they're somewhat limited to what they can get. And I think that's a good thing because that's what you need to do as a big organization, is sort of lock that down and protect your intellectual property and your confidential data. So the emergence and increasing pattern of cybersecurity attacks and cybersecurity issues, combined with the fact that high profile companies are using S4HANA, I think it only makes sense that SAP focus on cybersecurity and patching and all that good stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And talking about how businesses can maybe overlook how important it is to really protect their data within SAP, what are some aspects specifically that businesses should maybe pay more attention to when using SAP?
Well, I think the biggest risk, honestly, is not the nefarious outside hackers. That is a risk, and it happens. Here in the news fairly often, you hear of companies that had a breach or some security information was stolen. In fact, anytime I get on my browser on my phone, I get this alert that some of my information has been part of some breach somewhere, but they don't tell you where. And it just says you should change all your passwords. So I feel like I'm always changing my passwords, trying to protect information. So it seems like it's front and center for a lot of people, just security in general. So yeah, I think it's a pretty big deal. Now I forgot what your question was. I went off on a tangent there and forgot your question. So what was the question
No,
again?
yeah, that was basically the question. Like, what specific things should businesses pay attention to?
Hmm.
Like, what should they protect specifically if you had to like name a few things?
Well, I'd say so. In addition to the sort of call it the outside cybersecurity threats and concerns, the bigger one is, as I mentioned before, your employees, and not because your employees are trying to steal all your stuff necessarily, but because if they don't know, or if they have too much access to confidential information, or don't know what to do with it, or don't know how to protect it, you just don't want that information getting out there if they don't need to have it. If they don't need to have access to certain information, don't give them access. Not because you're a mean person trying to hide stuff from your employees, but just because you need to protect your data and your assets however you need to. So I'd say, making sure you spend time during an S4HANA implementation to really button up your security profiles is super important. Making sure your internal audit group signs off and blesses those security profiles. That's all stuff that takes quite a bit of time, honestly. And so that could slow down your testing cycles. And a lot of times companies don't have that factored into their implementation plan, and the time that it takes to get your internal audit to sign off on your internal controls and whatnot. So I think having internal controls is critical, and S4HANA is a great tool for it if you use it the way it should be used to tighten those controls. So those would be the two things I'd say. The main thing being, your security profiles that you use for your employees.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes sense. And I mean, this might be some good questions to ask Marcus, who is going to be on this podcast later, on how you should protect your data. So,
yes, I have a lot of questions for him. Anytime I talk to an attorney, on one hand, I get nervous because I don't know why. I just feel like, oh my gosh, I'm talking to an attorney. Is he gonna sue me or something? I don't know. But in this case, this is a friendly attorney. He's actually a client of ours. We've done expert witness work for him on S4HANA and other ERP types of implementations. Our expert witness practice, by the way, will testify in courts and analyze S4HANA failures to help courts that are going through litigation or that are involved in litigation in S4HANA related implementation. So that's how he and I met, was doing ERP implementation expert work for some of the clients he was working with. And we're going to have him on the show to sort of get that attorney's perspective, or what are the things that could go wrong? What are the things you need to protect yourself against? Beginning with the contract negotiations and the sales cycle, all the way through your implementation, your subscription agreements, the way you use resources and outside consultants, how you protect data. That's another thing that you're alluding to here, Darian. So a lot of stuff we're going to cover with Marcus, and it's going to be super interesting. Don't worry, he's not your traditional lawyer. He's actually a very personable attorney, and I don't mean to offend all the other attorneys out there by suggesting you're not personable, but I put him more on the higher side of personality compared to most attorneys. So I'm excited to have him on the show. So we're going to take a quick break. We'll bring Marcus on, and we're going to talk about lessons from a lawyer's perspective on S4HANA implementations here in just a moment. First, we're going to take a quick break. You're listening to the Journey to S4HANA podcast.
Are you looking for ways to promote your product or service to enterprise technology decision makers and influencers throughout the world, like the ones who listen to this podcast? Major Tom Productions creates media, events, and influencer marketing for B2B technology providers. Our productions are exciting, educational, disruptive, and effective. Most importantly, they create results. Our content is unlike any other in this industry, engaging, influential, and trusted by technology buyers and influencers throughout the world. Each month, our productions reach hundreds of thousands of targeted buyers and decision makers who trust and engage with our honest and tech-agnostic content. With long-tail viral results and engagement with our content, Major Tom Productions provides a way to reach your target market and create awareness, calls to action, and a connection with potential customers. So collaborate with us today. Learn how we can feature your product or service on podcasts such as Transformation Ground Control, Journey to S4HANA, and Journey to Dynamics 365. We can also feature your brand on our YouTube channel called Digital Transformation with Eric Kimberling, which boasts over 100,000 subscribers and over 2 million video views per year. You can also participate in our in-person events, including our Digital Stratosphere Conference. Contact us today to learn more. We can tailor a marketing campaign that works for you. We look forward to helping more people learn more about and become engaged with your brand.
The last thing you want to have happen is for your digital transformation to end up in court. I've been doing this for 20 years and I have seen everything. My name is Marcus Harris. I'm a software and technology attorney focusing my practice on drafting and negotiating software-related contracts and litigating software disputes across the country. Feel free to reach out to us at taflaw.com. We'd love to talk to you about the litigation process and what you can expect.
Hello and welcome back to Season 1, Episode 7 of the Journey to S4HANA podcast. My name is Eric Kimberling here with Darian Fiakuski. You can find new shows of this podcast every week at journeytosforhana.com. You can also see all the past episodes, all 6 previous episodes of this podcast at journeytosforhana.com as well. The show is sponsored by Third Stage Consulting Group, an independent consulting firm that helps clients with their S4HANA implementations as well as other types of ERP implementations as well. We're not affiliated with SAP. We do all kinds of ERP implementations. S4HANA just happens to be one of them we do. And this podcast is produced by Major Tom Productions. If you'd like to sponsor the show or feature your brand on the show, you can reach out to Major Tom using the contact information I've included in the description notes below for this episode. I'm excited for our next guest. First time on this show, on this particular show, although he has been on our sister podcast called Transformation Ground Control. He's been on that podcast a few times, but this is the first time we've had him on this Journey to S4HANA podcast. First time we've been talking specifically about SAP and S4HANA implementation. So we're going to talk here with Marcus Harris, partner at Taft Law, talking about a lawyer's perspective on S4HANA implementations, as well as S4HANA subscription licenses and other legal and contractual issues. All that being said, Marcus, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks, Eric. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here. Before we jump in, you and I have known each other for a long time, but some people listening and watching here today may not know who you are. But why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, if you don't mind, your background in the ERP space, in the SAP space in particular?
Yeah, so I'm a partner at a law firm called Taft Law, out of their Chicago office. Taft is about 900 attorneys now, practicing in a variety of different legal areas, and one of the areas that we practice in is technology law, with a specific focus in technology-related transactions and technology-related litigation, with a even more focused area being this space here, the ERP contract negotiation, and then ERP failures. And I've been doing this for about, I'd say, over 20 years, and I've seen just about everything that you can see from a legal side in this industry. I started my career at SAP actually in the early 2000s, then transitioned over to Infor, and then went back into private practice.
Great. So you have a unique perspective, having been on sort of both sides of the negotiation table and both sides of the litigation table, of having worked at the software vendors, but now having also worked for end clients as well. Is that right?
Well, and I think that's a valuable perspective to bring to the table, because not only do you have an understanding of what your clients want from a licensee perspective, or from just a customer's perspective, you understand exactly what the sales vendors or the software vendors sales techniques are, kind of what the tricks of the trades are, what provisions are going to be negotiable, what provisions aren't negotiable, and I think more importantly, what is reasonable to ask for and what should be in those contracts to give your client, what I would call a dog in the fight if everything goes sideways.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I'd be curious to hear some of your thoughts, having worked for SAP on the other side of things, and now being on both sides of the table. Now, just to clarify, you when you're helping people through litigation, is it just vendors, just end customers, or is it a combination of both?
It's really a combination of both. I've represented software vendors that have been accused of fraudulent inducement and negligent misrepresentation and breach of contract, and we also represent clients that have been victimized by certain software vendors in connection with failed ERP implementations and digital transformations that have failed spectacularly.
Right. Okay. Great. So you've been in this SAP space now for quite some time. S4HANA, is more recent. I think is 9 years ago now that it was introduced to the market. But in general, how has SAP sourcing and contracting evolved over the last couple decades? In particular, with S4HANA, how is that, the contracting model and the procurement model, the negotiation model, how's that all changed here in recent years with the introduction of S4HANA?
Yeah, that's a good question. And, I've been doing this for such a long time. I remember R3 and these legacy R3 contracts that we would have when I was in-house at SAP. SAP has really evolved. It went from R3 to, I think it was called mysap.com, MySAP, and then, other iterations of the product. But I mean, fundamentally, the product, while it has changed its name and it's kind of changed its look and feel, I mean, substantively, it's still, the SAP core product, depending on what we're talking about. There's certainly different pieces of functionality and the like. But I think the delivery model has absolutely changed. And with that, the contracting model has changed. Back when I was there, the primary delivery model was really an on-premise software solution. Okay. We were just starting to get into this hosted model. I think we were using, I think it might have been HP or IBM to do some limited hosting, which then really turned into kind of a cloud delivery model over time. And it was a new way of doing things, and the limitations of liability and the risks that SAP was willing to take were pretty narrowly focused way back then. I think now it's really matured, but what I've seen and experienced over, certainly I'd say the last 9 to 10 years, is really a hardening in SAP's contractual positions. And I think SAP always had a reputation for being very reasonable, very willing to work with you as a customer to address your issues and concerns with their contractual framework and their contractual positions. And so, I mean, it even was such that, when I was there, and I don't think this is giving anything away, but it's common in the industry, there was a playbook that instructed everybody that was negotiating their contracts in-house, how to do it. Right. And if the customer doesn't like this provision, then there's a drill down. And then if they don't like that drill down, there's another drill down. And then you've got to go for approval, from this person to make modifications to that. So it was baked into their mentality to be incredibly flexible. And I think a lot of that flexibility is gone today. They're just not as willing to make concessions and negotiate with you as they were even say 5 years ago or so. So it's a much more difficult process than it used to be.
Right, right. So, in addition to it being more difficult and some of the hardening that SAP seems to have taken in its contracting processes here with S/4HANA, what are some of the biggest negotiation mistakes customers make when they're procuring S/4HANA software, either from a contractual perspective or just from a general procurement perspective? What have you seen to be the most common mistakes?
Yeah, I mean that's a great question, but I mean there's so many, right? And it's almost kind of like you got to cherry pick from just a buffet of issues that we see on a regular basis.
Right.
I think really from a pure contract negotiation standpoint, it's having this false sense of urgency to get that deal closed because you're going to lose some sort of big discount or some sort of major concession that has been given to you. Okay, it's whether it's an end of year deal, an end of quarter deal. There's just an enormous amount of pressure that the sales, the reps or account executives are going to put on you to get that thing done, and it's really illusory in my view. I mean, I've never seen a situation where, hey, we missed the year end and now the whole thing is gone. It might be different, but it's just going to be adjusted, right? That account executive or sales rep has now lost his incentive to give you a huge deal because they're going to miss their bonus or they have missed it. But the numbers, their obligations and their requirements are still there, and so you may not get the same deal, and it may not be as good, but it's going to be equivalent, I would say. So believing and buying into that false sense of urgency that they create, I think SAP is good at creating this kind of sense of chaos around the negotiation process. So, you don't get to a decision maker quickly. You have to go through many levels. You start with maybe a contract specialist, a low level attorney that's got to get approval from, two people higher up. So you're never dealing with, the person that can actually say yes. You're only dealing with people that can say no to you. And that's problematic if you're trying to get this thing done efficiently. But that's part of the process. And that's kind of part of the game that they will sometimes play with you. One of the other things that we see is, when you buy into this, sense of urgency, you buy into this narrative that I think is a false narrative that, hey, this is a consistent delivery model across our customer base, and so therefore the concessions that are in each of these contracts, they have to be the same. We can't make exceptions for you. So essentially, this contract is really not negotiable, and there's not a lot of flexibility here. You can't buy into that, and that's a huge mistake that we see. You sign that agreement, with the carrot of that big discount looming over you, and you sign it in exchange for not negotiating it at all. That's one of the worst things that you can do, because when push comes to shove and you've got to enforce that contract, there's not going to be anything in there that's going to be beneficial to you. It's all going to be slanted towards the benefit of SAP to your detriment, and God forbid you got to litigate that contract, because then you're going to have a real problem. I think some of those are the pure contract issues. Those are some of the bigger mistakes that we see. From kind of a more general perspective, I think it's really understanding or misunderstanding or underestimating the complexity of both the contract negotiation process and really what you're getting yourself into with respect to the integration itself.
I'm here with Marcus Harris talking about some of the legal implications and considerations for S/4HANA implementations. I've got a lot more questions for Marcus, but first we're going to take a quick break. You're listening to the Journey to S/4HANA podcast. People oftentimes ask me how I built such a strong social media following on YouTube and LinkedIn and Facebook and other outlets. And the fact of the matter is it took me a long time to build a following through a lot of trial and error, making a lot of mistakes. Had I known that there were companies out there that could help me build my brand, I would have done that a long time ago. I didn't know that, but the good news is that there is today a consulting firm that will help you through building your own personal brand through some of their training programs. The company is called Roll Off Consulting, and if you're familiar with Emma Roloff. She's someone that I've had on this podcast before, and she's well known in the digital transformation space as well as the sales space. And she's big on TikTok, YouTube, and LinkedIn. And she and her husband have started a training course and a training company that focuses on helping people build their personal brands and helping them to sell themselves digitally. So whether you're a salesperson that's trying to reach more customers or you're an individual that's just trying to build your personal brand, that's something that they help with through their training programs. And they've offered listeners of this podcast a free 5-day LinkedIn challenge. And I encourage you to check it out. I've included a link below for this podcast. If you go to the podcast notes, you'll find a link that gets you free access to this 5-day challenge where you'll get step-by-step guidance. You'll get real results. So you'll get some tangible results from the program. And you also get a special offer at the end of it. So it's exclusive to listeners of this podcast. Be sure to check out the link below if you want to work on building your personal brand, or if you're in sales and you're trying to reach more people. Whatever the case may be, check it out. It's free to listeners of this podcast. You can check it out via the link below.
If you are involved in any sort of digital transformation or business change initiative, you will want to download the 2021 Digital Transformation Report. With its comprehensive overview of business and technology trends and best practices, this report is a must-have guide for any transformation project or executive team. Download this free report by visiting Third Stage Consulting at thirdstage-consulting.com. You can also visit our website to learn more about us or download independent reports, videos, and other best practices. Again, visit thirdstage-consulting.com today to learn how you can take your transformation to the third stage of success.
Hi there. Welcome back to the Journey to S4HANA podcast. My name is Eric Kimberling here with Darian Fiakuski. You can find new episodes of this show at journeyto4hana.com. You can also find past episodes of this show at journeyto4hana.com. The show is sponsored by Third Stage Consulting, an independent consulting firm that helps clients with their S4HANA implementations as well as other types of ERP implementations as well. And the show is produced by Major Tom Productions. You can learn more about sponsorship opportunities with Major Tom Productions, including on this podcast, by contacting the contact information I've included in the show notes or the description field below for this episode. So I'm here with Marcus Harris talking about some of the legal implications and considerations for S4HANA implementations. Let's jump back into the conversation. But just to build on a couple things you mentioned, I think are really good points. I mean, you talked about, creating chaos in the market or how SAP likes to, I don't know that they like it necessarily, but their MO is to create chaos in the negotiation process. And I think they've done that quite a bit too with not only the migration to the cloud and trying to get as many of their customers, not just on SAP or S4HANA on-prem, but trying to get as many of their customers as they can to S4HANA public cloud, ideally, if not private cloud is kind of a second best option for them. So that you have a different contracting model for cloud-based licensing or subscriptions than you did with on-prem with ECC and R3. Do you see that being a sticking point or a point that organizations trip up on?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think, the different model, I mean, even to the extent, say you're coming from a legacy, SAP system, and now you've got to, convert that contract to a cloud delivery model. I mean, that's an incredibly complicated process in and of itself. And that's not even taking into consideration the software and the integration. That's not necessarily just, an upgrade, right? You're not just upgrading your system. I mean, you're pulling something out and replacing it with something else. And so again, you come back to this concept of underestimating the complexity of the software. I mean, any digital transformation, any ERP system is going to be complex. But when you look at SAP, and SAP has a reputation for being complex, it just does.
Right.
And so if you're underestimating, the complexity of your digital transformation in general, you couple that with a complex system, and maybe you're on the legacy system, and now you're moving to a cloud delivery model. I mean, it's just a recipe for disaster if you're not ready for it, right? I mean, you got to go into this with eyes wide open and know exactly what you're walking into. If you don't understand the lay of the land, you're setting yourself up for failure, in my view.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you. The other point of chaos that is affecting a lot of legacy SAP customers that are already on ECC R3 is this whole 2027 deadline to get legacy customers onto S4HANA. And that seems to be creating, at least in us being consultants on the other side of the table here, with our clients, That seems to be creating a lot of chaos and uncertainty too for customers that maybe they weren't necessarily ready for or planning on an SAP upgrade or a re-implementation of software, but now they're sort of being forced into it because SAP has put this deadline out there. Are you seeing that as well, or is that affecting the way organizations approach the negotiation process?
It is, and we are seeing that. Our clients are having, again, what I would say a false sense of urgency associated with upgrading or moving over, and it really affects the negotiation process. You've got a contract maybe in place for your legacy system that you've been using, that you're comfortable with, that was maybe heavily negotiated when SAP used to heavily negotiate, and now what you're getting is, in its place, a three-page order form. Supposedly, it looks like it's 3 pages, but in reality, what SAP is famous for doing is, incorporating by reference all sorts of different URLs. So, you could have 10 different URLs in that 3-page document that all point to contracts that sit on the SAP website that can be upgraded or modified unilaterally by SAP at any time. So now you've gone from, a 3-page document that you think is manageable. At the end of a quarter, you're getting pushed to sign it. And then you realize, wait, this is not 3 pages at all. It's more like 50, 60, 70 pages, and it needs substantive contract review by an attorney now. I mean, that's not easy to be faced with, especially with these false sense of urgency and a deadline looming.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, makes total sense. Now, what about contracting a full suite of SAP products? So in other words, a lot of organizations that we work with are not only implementing S/4HANA, but they're also implementing another SAP product to kind of supplement that core ERP functionality that S/4HANA brings to the table. So, products like Ariba on the procurement side, SuccessFactors on human capital management, Concur on time and expense reporting. Those are just 3 examples of acquisitions that SAP has made and third-party systems that they've rolled into their suite of products. And I'd say most clients we work with have actually are deploying more than just S/4HANA. They're usually deploying S/4HANA plus one of those other systems or one of the other systems that SAP owns. Now, historically, back when you worked at SAP 20 years ago or so, SAP was known to be sort of like a greenfield. They developed their software from the ground up themselves. It was all one system. Yes, it was complex, multiple modules and all that stuff. But now they've sort of evolved a bit or changed a bit to where, yep, they've got that core S/4HANA product, but now they've got these third-party bolt-ons that they happen to own. How does that sort of best-of-breed model affect or complicate the contracting process and the negotiation process, or does it?
I mean, it does and it doesn't. Okay, I mean, you've got one integrated contract that has terms and conditions that apply usually to all the functionality that you're licensing from one particular vendor like SAP. Okay. Now, where it deviates from that is if these particular pieces of functionality, these bolt-ons, these modules, whatever you want to call them, if they're truly unique and different than the underlying software package that you're licensing, the likelihood that they're going to have different contractual documents associated with mitigating the risk or addressing the features that they come with is pretty high. And so now you go from having one document that's focused on the core SAP product to now having these kind of addendums or add-ons or schedules for different pieces that all have to be negotiated all at the same time. And there very well could be different terms and conditions that are applicable to each one of those bolt-ons, right? So maybe a particular bolt-on has a higher risk factor for SAP, so that results in a lower limitation of liability or a more broader disclaimer of warranty obligations or something like that. Okay, so it does create more of a problem as far as just the complexity of the contract negotiation process. It's going to take longer potentially. It's going to be more involved, and ultimately it's going to be more expensive. But it depends on the particular bolt-on. And then I think from a risk mitigation standpoint, you really have to be careful because some of these things, it's not this evergreen kind of platform that maybe they used to have where everything played really nicely together. Now these things are really, like you said, it's kind of a bolt-on Frankenstein model, and the lack of maybe compatibility or functionality between these two modules can create problems down the road from an integration implementation standpoint. And so you've got to account for that complexity in maybe additional documents like statements of work, change orders, whatever it is. You've got to manage this increased complexity of an integration or implementation.
Yeah. Yeah. That's really, really well said. And I think, if you back up even more and look at the incentives of SAP or the system integrator that's selling the software, they're going to lean into selling you as much software as they can. So of course they're going to suggest that, yeah, you need Ariba, you need success factors, you need this and that to support your needs. So I think you as an organization, aside from the contracting piece that you just described or the negotiation piece you just described, you have to back up even more and say, do we really need these other systems? And is it worth the risk that we're going to take on in the name of presumably better functionality and a better fit for our business? Yeah, maybe that's true. Maybe you are getting advanced functionality or additional capabilities you didn't have with the core S/4HANA product, but now you're creating other problems and you just have to assess that risk just like you do, a plethora of other decisions you have to make during any sort of ERP implementation or S/4HANA implementation.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, with additional modules and additional functionality, especially if they're not fully baked in, you're increasing complexity. When you increase complexity, you increase the likelihood of a failure, I think. I mean, you've got to mitigate that risk as the customer. The vendor doesn't care, right? I mean, like you said, they just want to sell you software and as much of it as possible. And the more difficult that implementation or integration process is for you, the more money that vendor is going to make.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. What about with the system integrator? So we've talked a lot about procuring and negotiating the software itself on the S/4HANA side, as well as some of the other complementary products that SAP offers. But what about on the services side, the implementation, the integrator side? What are some of the pitfalls to be aware of when you're negotiating with your system integrator or implementation partner, whoever that is that you're working with to do the implementation?
Yeah, look, here's what I tell my clients all the time, and I say, look, if it's gonna fail, if your integration or implementation project is going to fail, it's not gonna fail because the software doesn't work. Okay, and that's a general statement, and it's true generally most of the time. Certainly there's going to be situations where there's just not a good fit between you and the technology that you purchase for whatever reason. I think it's also, it happens not as much as some people think, but the sales team could have misrepresented the functionality, lied to you about what you're buying. Those are, that stuff certainly happens. But as a general statement, I think SAP has been implemented across the world in hundreds of thousands of customer sites. Okay, and the likelihood that software just doesn't work at all is probably on the lower side. It may not work for you in your particular instance or implementation of it for a variety of different reasons, but if it's going to fail, it's going to be because of a failure of people. Okay, and that's where the integrator comes into place, because that's where the rubber hits the road. That's where you're actually integrating, implementing, modifying, customizing the software, and you have to have the right contractual documents in place to be able to manage that process with a very high level of specificity. We see things like different software coding methodologies that don't support fixed deadlines and milestones and deliverables. That's problematic. You've got to put in place statements of work, change orders that lay out exactly what happens, because really, there's no better opportunity than the contract negotiation process, believe it or not. I mean, in my view, that's exactly what it's for you to get everything on the table. Okay. We expect our project manager to do this, 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 and this. We expect your project manager to do this. Here's the contractual language that obligates you to do it. Here's the contractual language that obligates us to do this. And all of that should be in the contract, because if you can put in place a contract that has that level of specificity, I mean, there's so much risk mitigation associated with that. I mean, you set yourself up for success rather than failure by paying more attention to that contract negotiation process. So I think, managing the vendor through the contract negotiation process is really the only way to go. And they're going to fight you and screaming and crying the whole way, but you've got to be strong and you've got to do it.
I'm here with Marcus Harris talking about some of the legal implications and considerations for S/4HANA implementations. I've got a lot more questions for Marcus, but first we're going to take a quick break. You're listening to the Journey to S/4HANA podcast. Hi, this is Eric Kimberling, and I'm the CEO of Third Stage Consulting Group. And I wanted to take a moment and tell you a little bit about Third Stage and what we do and how we help clients through their S4HANA implementations. First of all, Third Stage is technology agnostic, meaning that we're not affiliated with SAP. However, we do have quite a bit of experience helping clients through their S4HANA implementations. We help clients evaluate and do a fit gap analysis of S4HANA. We help them find the right system integrator. We help them negotiate their contracts with SAP and their system integrator. And then we also help with implementation planning and the implementation itself. So we help mobilize the right resources, make sure you've got a solid and realistic program to manage overall S4HANA implementation. And then we'll help with the program management, the change management, as well as process improvement. We also provide some technical services around data migration, as well as architecture and system integration as well. So those are just some of the things we can do to help you through your transformation. And if you're looking for more information about it, or if you'd like to learn more, feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to just bounce around ideas or be an informal sounding board for you as you begin your transformation. You can reach me by contacting me via the contact information in the links below in the description field for this podcast. So look forward to chatting with you, and we'll see you soon.
If you are aiming for transformation success, turn to Third Stage Consulting Group. Third Stage's independent and technology agnostic consulting team helps clients define their digital strategies, define their roadmaps, and manage their transformations. With offices in the US, Europe, and Australia, our team helps the world's most forward-thinking organizations through their transformation pitfalls and risks. If you are embarking on a digital transformation or business change initiative, contact Third Stage Consulting to see how we can help you reach the third stage of transformation success. Learn more about us and download independent reports, videos, and other best practices at thirdstageconsulting.com.
Hi there. Welcome back to the Journey to S4HANA podcast. My name is Eric Kimberling here with Darian Fiakuski. You can find new episodes of this show at journeyto4hana.com. You can also find past episodes of this show at journeyto4hana.com. The show is sponsored by Third Stage Consulting, an independent consulting firm that helps clients with their S4HANA implementations as well as other types of ERP implementations as well. And the show is produced by Major Tom Productions. You can learn more about sponsorship opportunities with Major Tom Productions, including on this podcast, by contacting the contact information I've included in the show notes or the description field below for this episode. So I'm here with Marcus Harris talking about some of the legal implications and considerations for S4HANA implementations. Let's jump back into the conversation. It's hard because on one hand, this is a partner you're going to work with for probably years to come, as you go through this complex implementation. So you want to play nice with that partner, right? But I think a lot of times organizations play too nice and they defer too much to the system integrators and to the vendors. And, rather than kind of not going with their guts, but doing what's in their best interest and making sure they protect their best interest. A lot of times during that negotiation cycle, it seems like you get this learned helplessness or this, well, you're the expert, so I'm just going to defer to whatever you tell me I should do versus, no, this is what I need and here's what I need from you. And do you see that dynamic sort of getting out of hand or out of balance in negotiations?
I see it all the time. And, there's two ways to look at that, right? I mean, you as a customer aren't going to be implementing a system on a regular basis, right? I mean, the
Right.
life cycle of one of these products is many, many years. And so the last time anyone at your organization implemented a new software system is 5, 6, 7, 10, maybe even more years ago. And so, the likelihood that you've got the level of experience and expertise on hand to be able to wrestle this thing to the ground is probably on the low side, right? And you're hiring, an integrator for a reason because they're an expert. But, I've got a failure case that was just like this, where the client that I represented, they didn't want to have anything to do with the integration. They just said, we're going to rely on you, integrator. You tell us what the best practices in our industry are, and you implement them and integrate them. We don't want to map out our business processes. We don't want to do any of it. We don't have time. We're going to rely on you. And that ended up in litigation, and it really should have ended up in litigation because the customer didn't want to take any responsibility for the integration or implementation or the contract negotiation process.
Yeah. And that, you and I have both seen it, you as an attorney, me as an expert witness, we've seen that come up in court where, well, the common refrain or the finger pointing is, they're the SI or the software vendor. They know the S4HANA product better than anyone. So we just figured we would defer to them. And, that's true to some degree, but you have to take ownership. I mean, it's your company, just like you wouldn't, if you're having a house built or a house remodel done, most people aren't going to just totally outsource it to the general contractor and not have any oversight, let them have an open checkbook and do whatever they want. Chances are you're going to be actively involved. You're going to maybe micromanage at times. I know my wife did when we were doing some remodeling here recently. She was all over it. And, and so you have to have some sort of oversight and you want to be collaborative, but it's ultimately your project and you have to have that oversight with the vendor and with the system integrators.
Exactly. You've got to take ownership of it. I mean, I think it's a great comparison. I can't imagine a scenario where you're going to outsource, the whole remodel of a house and you don't care what your kitchen looks like. You don't care where the cabinets are. You don't care where anything is. You don't care what's used in the bathrooms. You just look, I just want to walk in and it's all done. Well,
right.
You're going to be disappointed. And it's even more so when you're integrating a mission critical piece of software that's going to run your business, the one client I had said, well, we just wanted to come in and turn it on like a light. I mean, that's what our expectation was. And, God help you if that's your expectation.
Yeah. And you think about, quote unquote best practices, if you're building a house, that's like saying, hey, just build me a house that's best practice. And where's a contractor going to start? You might end up with a house that's works for the average person in average middle class America or wherever you're based, but that you're probably not going to be happy with it. To your point, you've got to specify what your needs are and make sure you're getting what you need and make changes and pivot and when you need to, and also hold your SI accountable too.
Yeah, and this concept of out of the box, silver bullet, best practices, it kind of makes me chuckle in some ways because those things don't necessarily really exist. And if you're relying on a software vendor to tell you what the best practices are in your industry, the industry that you live and breathe, that's not a good situation either. And the way they determine those best practices is a little bit questionable sometimes.
Yeah, it's just this is the way we did it for a client recently, or we've done it a couple times for other clients. Doesn't necessarily mean it's going to work for you though.
Exactly.
You've been dancing around this. You've used the word failures a couple times here, so we'll just dive into it here. First of all, before I get into questions about challenges with implementations and why projects fail, I have to ask, I think I know the answer to this, but I'll ask you anyway.
Sure.
Is it cheaper if I'm going to hire an attorney like you? Is it cheaper to hire you at the beginning of a project when I'm first negotiating and getting started, or just have you come in and clean it up later when I end up with problems?
Yeah, it's always cheaper on the front end, right? I mean, you spend the money on the front end so you don't have to spend more money on the back end. And there's an old maxim in the legal profession: early legal advice is not expensive. And if you don't negotiate that contract, you don't have an SOW in place or a change order procedure that manages the integration, keeps it in scope, it becomes incredibly expensive to try to right size that project later on. And litigation is not easy. It takes your energy away from your business. It takes resources away from your business, monetary and whatnot. And it's incredibly stressful and expensive. And, success is not guaranteed ever. So,
right.
Yeah.
Very, very true. I agree with you. Cause then, you're paying to pursue or defend yourself against big dollar amounts, and the meter starts running really quick when you get into that. You have to hire experts like me to testify in addition to attorneys like you, and it just gets super expensive that way. But sort of shifting gears though and talking about implementations and some of the challenges that organizations have, what are some of the biggest challenges that you see customers have when they're implementing S4HANA?
I mean, with respect to S4HANA, I mean, I think, it's really having unreasonable expectations as to what the software can do. Okay. I think so many people come in and say, okay, well, look, we're going best of breed SAP. It's going to fix all of our problems. They have no understanding of the complexity of that product. It's broad, it's expansive, it's challenging to implement. You have to be ready for that. And if you think this is going to be like somebody, turning on a light switch for you, that is really not the way it's going to be. And anybody with that kind of an expectation, is almost guaranteeing that they're going to end up in a lawsuit. I think, when it comes to the implementation, certainly it's going to be more complicated than you expect. It's going to cost way more than you expect. And the likelihood that you're going to have a tremendous amount of business disruption is incredibly high. I mean, SAP is just complex, it's rigid. And one of the other things with SAP that's, I think, somewhat unique is, we talk about rigidity. It's just not necessarily a flexible system. And look, I'm not talking from a technology standpoint. I'm talking from a legal perspective. I mean, this is what I see in lawsuits.
Right.
And I don't pretend to be a technologist, but certainly what we see is customers that have had to adapt the way they do business to the way that software functions. And they thought, okay, well, we can fix that with modifications and customizations and modifications. And that is absolutely the pathway to a digital transformation failure right there. I mean, just, you look at the SAP Little lawsuit. That's exactly what it was. The software wasn't flexible enough to account for the way that Little did business. And there's a lot of nuance, and we can get into that. But that's really what it was, and that was having unreasonable expectations. I mean, that is the Little SAP software failure to a T.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's and there's so many of those to choose from. As far as case studies of organizations that have struggled with implementing the product. Are you seeing any trends as it relates to S4HANA failures and lawsuits? Is it getting better? Is it getting worse? Is it sort of staying the same? Or what's the trend you're seeing in troubled and failed implementations?
We are seeing more, to be quite honest with you. And I think that really is a product of pressure to transition. I think it's really a product of people not having an understanding of what they're getting into. They don't realize the complexity, the rigidity, the business disruption that they're setting themselves up for. They don't benchmark. They don't do the initial due diligence on the front end to have an understanding of what they're buying, as far as the process, and then maybe even the software features and functionality on the back end too. And so all of this contributes to a rise in the failure rate associated with SAP. And it's something that we're seeing in our practice. Unfortunately, we have clients that are calling us on a pretty consistent basis that are having trouble with SAP, and they're asking for advice. How do we right size this product? What do we do? Where do we go from here? How can we save this?
Right. Yeah. And if for the audience listening and watching here today, I'd love to hear what challenges you might be experiencing with your S4HANA implementation, or what challenges you have seen in your experience implementing S4HANA in the past. So I'd love to hear the feedback here in the comments as we go. What about, SAP is rolling out these new initiatives to really try to make it easier and more enticing for customers to switch to S4HANA. They have, SAP, for example, has rolled out a program called Grow, which is a way for the small and mid-market potential customers to hop on board to the S4HANA platform. And then they also have something called Rise, which is meant for existing SAP customers that are on legacy on-prem systems. It's a way to make it easier and more enticing for them to move over to the S4HANA cloud software. So these two programs, Grow and Rise, do you think, does this make it easier to implement S4HANA in the future? Does this affect the failure rates that you're seeing right now?
It does not make it easier. And I think it actually contributes to the failure rates that we see. Because what it does is it creates the false expectation that this is going to be easier than it actually is. So I think it's a marketing ploy on SAP's part to kind of dissuade people from having the perception that already is in the marketplace that SAP is overly complex, overly rigid, and difficult to implement. It just is, right? And the reality with SAP is it's either going to work for your business or it's not. And you can't rely on, what I would deem marketing fluff to get over that hump. And you certainly can't rely on, future customizations or adaptations or modifications to fix those issues. So I think, Grow and Rise, while, they sound nice and they want to make things easy, I think if you buy into that hype, it's problematic. It's not making it easier. It's contributing to the failure, in my view.
Yeah. I actually agree with you on that. I was kind of hoping you had a different answer because maybe it's just me that's crazy or something. But it appears that maybe I'm not crazy. Because we do see it with our customers, with our clients too, to where it creates this unrealistic expectation. And we talk about it all the time. I know you and I have chatted about this too. How unrealistic expectations is often the root cause of other problems and symptoms that come later on. And if you start the project with this unrealistic expectation of what the S4HANA implementation is going to be, whether you think it's just a lift and shift or whether you think that because I've got the RISE program behind me, now suddenly it's going to save me a ton of time and money. The fact of the matter is it's still a brand new software for you as an organization. It's been on the market for 9 years now, but for you as an organization, it's likely a brand new system that's totally different from ECC or R3 or whatever non-SAP product you might be using right now. And that's the heavy lift. I mean, that's the hard part. It's not whether or not SAP is pre-configured or whether or not S4HANA can do everything you need it to do. That helps for sure, but the real heavy lift comes from changing your processes, changing your people, changing your business model, all that stuff, and that just takes time and money.
Right, and the problem with those products or those marketing positions, Grow and Rise, is it tends to make you less focused on doing the hard work. Right? It's like, okay, well, we're this is marketed to us as Rise or Grow, and so now it's going to be less complex. So I don't need to devote as many resources as I otherwise would have. And I can take my foot off the gas, and it's all going to be easy. And now that contributes to the problems that you have because you weren't as focused as maybe you needed to be.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So with this backdrop that we've talked about here today, the negotiation and contracting backdrop, the implementation risks and pitfalls that organizations face, what sort of closing advice would you leave for customers that are about to embark on an S4HANA implementation, or maybe they're in the midst of a implementation right now?
Yeah, I mean, look, if you're about to embark on this kind of a implementation project, I think you've got to do your due diligence. You've got to know what you're getting into. You've got to really take advantage of all the resources that are available to you. And what I mean by that is, look, I'm not pitching anyone's services or advocating for anything, but you've got to seek out professionals that can help you, to give you what I called earlier a dog in the fight. I mean, you want to have a robust software selection process. You want to vet that software product, make sure that's what really is good for your business. And, then you really have to understand what you're getting into from an implementation process. How complex is it really going to be? How much is it going to cost? What have other companies my size licensing the same product encountered? And what can I learn from them? I mean, those are the kinds of things that you need to go. That's the knowledge you need to obtain before you go down this path. I mean, if you're already in it, I think keep your head down and do the work. Understand that you got something difficult that you're engaged in, and you got to get to the other side. And there are no shortcuts with this stuff. There is no, in my view, there's no industry best practice. There's no out of the box solution, and there is no silver bullet. And you got to do the work, and you got to make it work for you, because this is your implementation, it's your project, and you've got to own it.
Yeah, that's really well said. I agree with everything you said. I might just add one thing I would add that I think is important too is doing sort of a fit gap analysis of what S4HANA can and can't do. Even once you've selected the product, it's really important to understand where the gaps and deficiencies are, so that what you're going to do about it. Are you going to customize the software? Are you going to go find a third-party bolt-on? Are you going to change your processes to fit that? And you've got to take that time to reconcile what are inevitably going to be gaps between what you think you want and what S4HANA can do. The other thing too is just understanding how much can you really bite off on an S4HANA implementation, because even though S4HANA has some gaps and deficiencies and things it can't do well, there's other things it could do really well, probably light years ahead of what you're doing as an organization, especially as you get into some of the machine learning and AI type stuff and the RPA, the robotic process automation and whatnot. The S4 platform gives you a whole new architecture that can do a lot with analytics, for example, but you're not going to get there overnight. So you've got to figure out realistically, how are you going to phase this? How much can we really bite off on the project now versus, in a future phase? So that'd be a couple things I'd add to the list of things to make sure you do now as early as possible in the project too.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, I think those are critical, right? You got the gap analysis in particular, especially with SAP, is huge.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Marcus, thanks for being here. Really appreciate it. You're one of the few people I know that knows the SAP and the S/4HANA contracting space so well. What's the best way for people to get a hold of you or learn more about you, connect with you, all that good stuff if they want to follow you on social media or whatever?
Yeah, look, if you have any questions about anything that we've talked about, feel free to reach out to me at taftlaw.com. You can also follow me on LinkedIn, Twitter. Easily find me, put my name in there. Software lawyer, I think, is my handle. So I look forward to answering anybody's questions and certainly helping them navigate this process.
All right. Thank you, Marcus. Great conversation and some really compelling stuff and important things to think about. I think it's a great guideline or set of guidelines for S/4HANA customers as they begin their journey and as they continue through their transformation journeys. We've got a lot more to cover. We're going to debrief and dive into some of the follow-up from that conversation here in just a moment, but we're going to take a quick break first. We'll be right back with more Journey to S/4HANA. If you're going through an S/4HANA implementation, you're looking for best practices and tips on how to make your project more successful, I encourage you to check out 2 resources that I made available to our listeners here on this podcast. First is our guide to a successful S/4HANA implementation. It's a paper that I wrote based on all of our clients that have implemented S/4HANA, some of the lessons we've learned, some of the best practices that we typically advise our clients to follow when going through their S/4HANA implementation. So be sure to check that out. You can find that in the links below in this podcast. You can also scan the QR code right in front of you. The second thing you might want to check out is an online course that I've created. It's a course that's called the Deep Dive into SAP S/4HANA Implementations. And in that 2.5-hour course, I get into all the basics of what SAP S/4HANA is, what it takes to make the project more successful, how to manage change, how to handle the project planning, how to manage your system integrator, as well as some case studies from some of our clients and some of the lessons learned from some of our clients. So check out that training as well. So there's 2 things you could check out here, both in the links below. One is the guide to S/4HANA implementations. The other is my S/4HANA training course. So be sure to check it out. And our goal here is to help you be more successful in your transformation. So hope you found this information useful, and we'll continue on with the show.
Are you looking for ways to promote your product or service to enterprise technology decision makers and influencers throughout the world, like the ones who listen to this podcast? Major Tom Productions creates media, events, and influencer marketing for B2B technology providers. Our productions are exciting, educational, disruptive, and effective. Most importantly, they create results. Our content is unlike any other in this industry, engaging, influential, and trusted by technology buyers and influencers throughout the world. Each month, our productions reach hundreds of thousands of targeted buyers and decision makers who trust and engage with our honest and tech-agnostic content. With long-tail viral results and engagement with our content, Major Tom Productions provides a way to reach your target market and create awareness, calls to action, and a connection with potential customers. So collaborate with us today. Learn how we can feature your product or service on podcasts such as Transformation Ground Control, Journey to S/4HANA, and Journey to Dynamics 365. We can also feature your brand on our YouTube channel called Digital Transformation with Eric Kimberling, which boasts over 100,000 subscribers and over 2 million video views per year. You can also participate in our in-person events, including our Digital Stratosphere Conference. Contact us today to learn more. We can tailor a marketing campaign that works for you. We look forward to helping more people learn more about and become engaged with your brand.
Hello and welcome back to the Journey to S/4HANA podcast. My name is Eric Kimberling here at Darian Fiakuski. You can find new episodes of this show at journeyto-s4hana.com. Every week we release a new episode. And again, go to current and past episodes at journeyto-s4hana.com. So, Darian, we just had Marcus on the show. First time we've had an attorney. First time we've talked about some of the legal stuff that is important, but not always fun to talk about. What were some of your thoughts or questions from that conversation with Marcus?
Yeah, it was great to get a legal perspective, especially deep diving into SAP and S/4HANA specifically. I thought that the conversation was really informative, and but I do have some questions to follow up the conversation with, as always.
Great.
one of the questions is, Marcus mentioned the risk of signing agreements without negotiating terms, particularly in exchange for promised discounts. What steps can customers take to ensure they negotiate favorable terms while still capitalizing on potential cost savings? This might be something, I don't know if you can dive more into, or if we just need to get Marcus back on the show to ask him, but
Probably both. I can take a stab at it. We can have Marcus back on, which I'm sure we will at some point in the next season of the show as well. But what I would say, one thing he mentioned that I think is really important is just to not get too enamored by time-based discounts. SAP and their system integrators and implementers and resellers are all masters of sort of the time-based sale that says, okay, it's end of this month, end of this quarter, end of this week, end of this year, whatever it is. If I can hit my numbers, if I can get this deal done by this date, I can offer you X% discount. And keep in mind, you're dealing with a sales rep that lives day to day, quarter by quarter, has numbers they have to hit every quarter. So they're under a lot of pressure to close deals, on a timely basis. And however, that you can understand that doesn't mean it's your problem or something you should, wire your entire business or process around. So I'd say, first of all, I'd take those time-based deals or sales with a grain of salt. I agree with Marcus when he said in the interview that it's rare, if ever, that you see a vendor say, we're not going to honor that discount because you missed the end of quarter, end of week, end of month deadline or whatever we gave you. If you come back with a pen in your hand saying, hey, I want to sign that deal that you said expired last month, I'm ready to go, and they say no, the last thing they want is to go back to the negotiating table or back to the drawing board and starting over in the negotiation process. So that'd be one thing, is just the time-based sale doesn't need to be time-based. And not only because the discount won't go away most likely, but also because you need to do this on your tempo. I mean, if it doesn't make sense to sign the deal today because you're not going to start the project for 3 more months or whatever it is, then don't sign the contract now. Wait 3 more months. Wait till you're ready to sign it. Even if you're going to move forward, it doesn't mean there's any real benefit to signing it now. In fact, I would argue there's more risk in prematurely signing a contract because so much can change. I mean, you could have a bad quarter, your numbers come out, you miss your earnings numbers, stock price drops, and now all of a sudden, there is no SAP project to be had right now, or, they stop spending or they cut back spending, but you've already committed contractually to whatever you committed to months ago. So you kind of have to think about that. The other thing you have to think about is you may not be ready and you may not want to sign right away because you've got a lot of legwork and a lot of prep work you need to do to get ready for an S4HANA implementation. And we're going to talk about this in a future episode. I think it's episode 11 or 12. But in several weeks from now, we have a guest on who's going to be talking about sort of that phase 0 implementation planning and how to mobilize your team, how to get the program plan in place, get the resources in place, get your business process blueprint in place, get your change strategy in place, do all that stuff. Then you start deploying S4HANA because that's your blueprint, that's your foundation. So there's no point in you signing a big, massive subscription deal with SAP prior to that phase because you're going to end up paying the subscription costs for 2, 3, 4 months or whatever while you get ready, but yet you're not even touching the software yet. So for all those reasons, I say those are the biggest pitfalls and things you should be aware of and watch out for as you go through an S4HANA negotiation process.
Yeah, definitely. And I think one thing that stood out to me during that conversation is when Marcus, he said that they really are good at creating a false sense of urgency to get you to sign that contract, which is what you just said too. Like you said, you don't have to sign it. You can still get that discount most likely if you're ready to sign in the future. So don't let that false sense of urgency rush you into making a decision.
Yeah.
Another question I had is, looking ahead in the software and ERP landscape, what do you foresee as potential future trends or developments in ERP contract negotiations, particularly in relation to SAP and emerging technologies in the ERP space?
Ooh, that's a good question. Another one we need to ask Marcus when he's back on. But,
Yeah.
I'd say that the one thing that bothers me about the cloud movement that I don't think we fully have realized yet, but I think there's a reckoning coming, a day of reckoning coming in years from now, is what happens when you decide, let's just say you're on S4HANA and you decide for whatever reason, business changes, the technology changes, and there's sort of this divergence between your business and what S4HANA can do. You decide, hey, it's time for us to move off of S4HANA and move to something else, like Oracle Fusion or whatever, Microsoft Dynamics. let's just say. What's going to happen when you've got all your data in the cloud? You've got all this AI built in the cloud for, in S4HANA, like you're using Jolie, and you've got all this data housed in the cloud. I think technically, I believe, I'm not an attorney. Again, this is a question for Marcus. I believe you own that data, even though it's housed in SAP's cloud solution. But what happens when we need to get all that data out and you need to migrate it? Is that going to be any harder now that it's in the cloud? It certainly is good for SAP because it's making you stickier with them. Now not only are you using an application of theirs, but you're having them host the system along with all your data in the cloud. So it makes it stickier from SAP's perspective. But what about you as an organization when you want it to be unsticky? How do you unstick from SAP? And I think that's something that's going to have to come out in contract negotiations. There'll probably be some legal issues that come out, not just with SAP, by the way. I think you're going to see this with every cloud provider out there. But that's probably the biggest thing that comes to mind. And then also, I also think about what happens when SAP makes a unilateral change to their software. And because you're using a cloud edition of the software, especially if you're in public cloud, you don't necessarily have control or a say when that functionality hits your system. So what happens if SAP rolls out some functionality and literally overnight, you've got this new process that doesn't fit, or it's sort of a mismatch with what you need, or it somehow disrupts your business? Is SAP liable for that? Is that something you need to negotiate in the contract terms? I don't know. I'm not an attorney, and this is why I'm not an attorney, because this stuff overwhelms me. But that'd be something for Marcus. But those would be two big things I'd look at, is like data ownership and getting data out of the system, and then also the unilateral functionality that could disrupt your business potentially in the future.
Yeah, definitely. I guess we'll just need to have Marcus on next season as well to ask these more questions about all of this.
Yeah. For every question he answered, he left us with even more questions now. So we'll definitely have to have him back on. But I'd be curious to hear from the audience what they think on some of these legal issues. What do you think the big legal issues are, the legal challenges or risks are with either contract negotiations or implementation of S4HANA, getting off of S4HANA potentially someday in the future? Love to hear feedback from the audience here. So great episode. Thanks for those topics, Darian, and those great questions. It was a fun episode, especially considering we weren't talking about the sexiest, most fun topic as we talk with an attorney about legal considerations, but somehow it ended up being okay. It ended up being pretty fun. So thank you for that. And thank you to the audience for the great questions as always. You can find past episodes of this show and upcoming episodes of this show at journeyto s4hana.com. The show is sponsored by Third Stage Consulting, an independent consulting firm that helps clients with digital transformations, including S4HANA implementations. And you can learn more about us and download plenty of S4HANA and other digital transformation types of materials at thirdstage-consulting.com. So be sure to check out the website there. The show is produced by Major Tom Productions. You can reach out to us to learn more about how to sponsor this show by using the contact information in the description field and notes below. So hope you all have a great week, and we look forward to seeing you next week on the Journey to S4HANA podcast. Take care.